Farmer Jesse here. So here's what I want to do with this video. I'm going to give you my definition of no-till, sort of definition that helps me to, I don't know, determine who I'm going to have on the No-Till Market Garden podcast, and kind of what we're going to talk about in these videos, and also what we're going to write about on no-tillgrowers.com. This is sort of what I think of when I think of no-till. So it feels a little vulnerable, I feel like I'm sharing an algorithm with you, but also, to make it worse, I'm going to ask for your criticism, your critique. What do you think of my definition? How would you add to it? What would you take away? And I don't know, what's your own definition of it? Do you even like that term? I don't know that I like it. So one thing I'm always trying to do is challenge my views of what no-till is. And that means both rein it in a little bit and also push it out a little bit. Because at this point in time, I don't think we've seen all the no-till methods. I don't think we've even kind of scratched the surface. So this is what I sort of look for and what I think about when I think of no-till. So let's do it. All right, first, if you are not subscribed to this channel, subscribe to the channel. Also subscribe to the No-Till Market Garden podcast. You can find it in iTunes. We'll put a link below. Season 2 is coming up in September. It's gonna be rad. I'm not gonna tell you who's on it, but it's gonna be rad. Here's the thing. If you are a Patreon member, you already know who's on it, because I let the Patreon members ask questions of the guests, sometimes pick the guests. There's also a perk for the Patreon members that if you want to, you can get your name put on the podcast. I'll just say it on the podcast, and you can forever prove to your grandkids that you were there to help spur this movement. That's a pretty cool perk. I think it's cool. Anyway, let's get into it. My base definition, what I think of as no-till, is this. Bear with me. An ecological approach to agriculture, which seeks to keep the soil covered as much as possible, planted as much as possible, and disturbed as little as possible in an effort to increase soil health and profitability for the farmer. So let's unpack that a little bit. So arguably the most brazen part of my definition is going to be the ecological approach, because you don't necessarily have to have an ecological approach to be a no-till grower, to have a no-till system. But I think that a good no-till system almost always is accompanied by a strong ecological system. So that includes all of the above ground fauna, a lot of the microbes, fungi, bacteria in the soil, very healthy, robust arthropod population. So all of the things that you would find in a non-agricultural area generally. So if you can generate a sort of a semblance of a natural system in an unnatural system, in an agricultural system, I think that is a massive achievement. And I think it's an achievement that can be almost exclusively done through no-till agriculture, which I recognize is very brazen, but it's how I feel about it. That was a horrible idea. Part 2 of my definition. Keep the soil covered as much as possible. What we use a lot of here on our farm is compost, but there are so many other really interesting covers. There's cardboard, there's straw mulch, there's mulch in place, lots of different cover crop material. We'll talk about that in a second. And there's a lot of covers we haven't even really thought of. Some people may be covering with peat, wood chips, different things that lots of people have access to different things, so there's a lot of potential there. Point of keeping the soil covered is pretty simply just to protect the soil biology when it's blazing hot outside and it's super sunny and 90 degrees. You need to keep armor on the soil. So something to keep that protected, something to keep it from burning up, losing all your carbon and all your moisture, and then the microbes drying up. You need something on the soil at all times. And it brings us to part number 2. It is something that I really look for in a great no-till system, and something I think about a lot in the definition is, and the goal with that is also acting as a mulch cover, right? Plants can be a great mulch cover, but they can also provide a lot of things that mulches can't. Mulches can only provide so much organic matter. If I'm talking about compost or anything else, it's only going to provide so much organic matter if you just lay it on the surface. But plants are photosynthesizing, right? They're constantly taking sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water, and they're mixing those three things together, releasing carbon sugars, carbohydrates, into the soil to feed soil microbes. And that's a really amazing thing, because that is actually sequestering carbon, building microbial diversity, and keeping those microbes alive. So not only are they being protected by the plant cover, you see the lettuce here is protecting the soil, but that lettuce is also feeding the soil. So that is something I think is really special when we talk about no-till, is the idea that you keep as much of that going as possible. Can you do no-till without that? Can you do no-till without having constant plants in the soil? Sure. But you need to have a cover if you're not going to have a plant there. And that cover ideally would feed the soil microbiology. And then there's disturbing it as little as possible. This is arguably the most confounding. And not necessarily for me. I'm very open-minded when it comes to soil disturbance. As long as those other things are kind of being achieved, and maybe the growers doing their best to keep it covered and keep the soil biology high and do as little disturbance as they possibly can, given their systems and the type of crops they grow, I'm a little bit more lenient on the disturbance part. I'm not sold on the idea that there are tools that are tillage and aren't tillage. I'm interested in how the tool is used and what the purpose is and why there's stuff on my lens here. Always clean your lenses with your t-shirt. It's a pro tip. And so I'm interested in how you're using the tool and why you're using it more than what the tool is. And because we can talk about how damaging the broad fork is, or we can even talk about how much, I don't know, pulling carrots is tillage. There's lots of nuance to it, but I don't think that's, in my mind, that's not really an issue when it comes to no-till. To me, I'm curious about if you're achieving the biological activity and the microbiological activity and the ecology that you're after, and creating the most robust system and the most productive system you possibly can with the greatest soil health. And if it requires a broad fork or a tilther or whatever, then I don't know. Which kind of brings us to two things. One, I really like the idea of not being too dogmatic about what is and what is not tillage, because it's restrictive. As soon as you get too dogmatic about what it is and what it isn't, it limits what you're willing to do and what you're willing to try. That kind of stuff interests me. I think that's fair game when it comes to talking about soil ecology, soil health, and biodiversity and those sorts of things. And then the other thing is that term, no-till. I don't love it. I've never loved it. It's a great keyword, right? If you're trying to reduce your tillage, what do you Google? You don't Google living soil. It's a great term as well, but you're generally not going to. Maybe how do I make my soil healthier? Maybe how do I reduce my tillage? But generally no-till. That's what we're looking for, right? Reduction of tillage. That's one of the best things you can do for your soil. How do you do it though? How do you do it on a commercial scale? That's one of the big things I'm always thinking about, is not just what we can do in backyards, but what can we do on a farm? Like a farm. That to me is extremely interesting. I think it's hard to kind of do that. You can do so much in a backyard, and I love backyard gardeners, and more people need to be gardening, but it's so hard to figure out systems that make sense on scale. And so that's another thing that I'm always looking for, is no-till on a scale that is profitable and manageable and actually reduces workload instead of increasing it. So, and profitability and all those things. So anyway, I'm gonna stop there. You all let me know what you think. It's a nice hot day. Enjoy it. Yeah. Thank you for watching. We'll see you later. Bye.